has moved on all that far. But notwithstanding those difficulties, we did get that master class, and I want just to pick up on some of the points that were made. In almost 30 years in the British Parliament, I lectured often the House of Commons about the authorship of the Palestinian tragedy, yes, but the wider conflicts within the Middle East, about which British parliamentarians were always ready to cluck as if they had no responsibility for the situation, the circumstances in which Palestine and the wider Arab area find themselves. Indeed, on one occasion, as I listened to member after member talk of their visits to what they called Israel, and particularly a town called Sderot, I had no idea that Sderot was being painted as Paris. And I asked the members who were telling us of their visits there if they had known that underneath Sderot were the bones and the bricks of Palestinian villages which had been obliterated from the face of the earth, and an Israeli city that they had all visited built upon it. I want to place the historical context of this, or underline that which has already been said. It was difficult to listen to everything that we've heard this evening without a mounting sense of anger at the crimes of British imperialism. And as we're in Ireland, it's worth making the point that this declaration was made 1 year after the attempt to drown the aspirations for independence and unity in Ireland in the suppression of the Easter Rising of the Irish people. It took place, as Professor Falk said, immediately after the secret, this is a key word, secret treaties drawn up between Mr. Sykes for the British and Mr. Picot for the French, in which, in a room in the House of Commons that I used to pass every day in the upper committee room corridor, on a very big table with a very big map of the Arab area, they literally, with their pencils and their rulers, divided up and created fake countries, countries which had no basis in any kind of anthropology or any kind of social historical basis. Pure invention. Countries that never existed were designated, and moreover, puppet kings were granted thrones that hadn't previously existed, and all in secret. In fact, we only learned of the existence of these secret treaties, the Sykes-Picot Anglo-French treaties, because when Lenin and the Bolsheviks overthrew the Tsarist government in the Bolshevik Revolution, also whose centenary we mark this year, exposed these secret treaties to the world, or we would never have known about them. But as Muhammad just alluded to, if you'll forgive me, I'll develop his point. This set of secret treaties was in absolute contradiction to other commitments that the British government had made to the Arab revolt leaders who had joined the British and French side in the First World War. And the deal was very clear that if you join us and rise up against Turkish Ottoman rule, we will grant you a united, independent Arab world. And of course, that promise was in absolute contradiction to the secret treaties of Sykes and Picot. And just ponder for a moment what the Arab world would today look like if that promise to the Arabs, delivered through the so-called Lawrence of Arabia, had been kept. There would be nothing called Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq. There would be one Arab area from the Atlantic to the Gulf, 360 million people with a common language, with a common culture, with a common belief in a single God. That Arab world would today, as a result of the discovery of oil and gas, be one of the great superpowers on the earth. Nothing would be able to happen without recourse to and agreement with that Arab superpower. So the cost to the entire Arab world of this perfidious Albion, displayed in all its ugliness in what we have heard this evening, is literally incalculable. Because instead of one Arab union from the Atlantic to the Gulf, we have 23 Arab countries, almost all of whom seem to be at war with each other 100 years later, and drowning millions in blood and misery. So when it comes to a calculus of the crimes of British imperialism, imperialism generally, but British imperialism most important for us, not because we have a British passport, at least for the time being, but because it's the biggest criminal in this picture. British imperialism's crimes dwarf all the others. And that's why we have not just the right to be angry about it, we have a duty to be angry about it, a responsibility to be angry about it. I want to add another point that hasn't been made sufficiently tonight, though Professor Falk touched upon it. Britain made this Balfour promise on behalf of one people to a second people, to grant that second people the land that belonged to a third people, without consulting any of the people involved. This is an important point because, as Montague's quotes from Muhammad made clear, actually Zionism was an idea, a nationalist idea, held at that time by a very small number of Jews. The great overwhelming majority of Jews agreed with Montague that they were Jews who were British, they were Jews who were French, they were Jews who were Russian, and so on. And that their demand was for equal citizenship of their own countries, not to go to somebody else's country and take it over and colonize it. The great majority of Jews in the world in 1917 were progressive, politically progressive, present in the growing communist movements, socialist movements, trade union movements, all over the developed world. Jews were in the vanguard of those movements. Marx himself was a Jew. Trotsky was a Jew. So many of the great thinkers and leaders of the progressive movements in the world were Jews who rejected the idea that they were not British, not German, not French, and that they somehow were aliens that had to find somewhere else to go and live. So when the British made that promise to the Zionist movement in 1917, they were not making it to the Jews, because most Jews wanted nothing to do with it, including the one Jew in the British cabinet at the time. And a point which has not been made is that one of the reasons for the development of this Zionist project was not because the leaders of the imperialist countries liked Jews, but the opposite of that. They wanted to see the back of the Jews in their countries. They wanted to see them leave Europe and go somewhere else. Balfour was an anti-Semite. He didn't like Jews. This promise that was made on behalf of the British, without any consultation with the British, to the Jews, though most Jews didn't want it, of course took no account whatsoever of the people whose land was being given away. And as you said, Mohammed, at the time, Britain did not even possess the land of Palestine when it gave it away. That makes it unique even by imperialism's standards. You're giving away somebody else's country before you've even got your hands on it. And you're only going to get your hands on it because Arabs are helping you in the First World War to defeat the Turkish Empire in return for a promise that you will give Palestine and all of the Arab countries to them. I mean, I knew that the British, my grandfather used to say that the reason that the sun never set on the British Empire was because God could never trust the British in the dark. If you didn't believe that already, then contemplating this level of treachery, betrayal, is surely enough to persuade you of it. This was pure colonialism. It has nothing whatsoever to do with religion. And this is a stand that we must be brave enough to make. We must not be frightened from expressing our solidarity with him because somebody falsely alleges that if we're in solidarity with him, that somehow we're against Jews or against Judaism. Nothing could be further from the truth. This was a pure colonial enterprise whereby a group of European Jews asked the British Empire for someone else's land on which they could build a white European colonial settlement, just like the British had in southern Africa and elsewhere. And the full truth of that is displayed in two things. First of all, virtually every one of the Zionist leaders to whom this declaration was made were explicit atheists. They only discovered that God promised them this land, or as someone put it, they don't believe in God, but they believe that God promised them this land. It's belied, more importantly, by the fact that they seriously negotiated to create this Israel in many other parts of the world, most of which have been adumbrated already. Patagonia in Argentina, Brazil, Uganda, the most advanced of the negotiations, the Seychelles. They would have, if the British had agreed and terms could have been settled, Israel would be in Argentina now, and we'd be supporting the ALO. Or in Uganda now, and we'd be supporting the ULO. It's a nonsense to pretend that any of this has anything to do with religion. It's to do with land, it's to do with European colonial white supremacist ideas. And it's about the British Empire's desire to have what was explicitly stated, I think by Churchill at the time, but it may have been by Balfour himself. It's disputed. If we can have a Jewish homeland in Palestine, it can be a loyal little British Ulster in the Arab world. That's a direct quotation from the cabinet discussions. A loyal little British Ulster in the Arab world. For you in this audience, surely, in a sense, that sums up the whole case. What was Ulster but an attempt to plant settlers to assist in the imperial subjugation of the native people of the island. Now, this is not ancient history. If it was, this would be a much smaller meeting taking place in a museum somewhere, and we could look at the artifacts of the ex-people called the Palestinians. Far from being ancient history, all of this is literally burning today. It is burning on the streets of Jerusalem. Of such moment to billions of people around the world. It is burning in Syria. It is burning in Iraq. It is burning in Yemen. It is burning in Palestine, in Gaza itself. Only this week, another major military attack by air and by sea was mounted against the caged people of Gaza, the largest open-air prison camp on the earth, in which 2 million people are entombed as living, dead, being starved of food, of medicine, of electricity, of education materials, of contact with the outside world, unable to leave, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. It is a giant barrel full of 2 million fish that the people who have entombed it can bomb at will and do. So, far from being ancient history, all of this story is living politics today that has helped create this deeply unstable and dangerous world. And my last point, Mohammed, would be, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but an apology from the British would be of no moment to me. How do you apologize for a crime like this? What value would it be for these liars, thieves, murderers and cheats to say sorry? It certainly wouldn't cut it for me. Sorry is something you say if you stand on somebody's toe, or maybe even gently bump their car at a traffic light. A crime which has disfigured the world, sent millions of Palestinians into exile, left rotting in refugee camps millions of other Palestinians in the neighboring countries, subject decade after decade after decade to those Palestinians inside the borders of Palestine, life in an apartheid state as second or even third class citizens, maybe even fourth class citizens. Sorry, wouldn't do it for me. I understand why you say that the Balfour Declaration is nothing to celebrate, and you're right about that. In fact, just one of the reasons why Jeremy Corbyn has been subjected to the atrocious campaign that he has suffered over the last 2 years is that if he was able to, he'd be making this speech that I'm making this evening. If he could, he would say that the Balfour Declaration is just another mark of shame on the British Imperial record, and that far from celebrating it, we need not to apologize, but to make redress. And the only redress that is possible is for the British to support, and if their government will not, then the people should, to support the right of the Palestinian people to return to their homeland, and the right of everyone between the borders of the river and the sea to form